I'm actually going to talk a little bit about some background issues of where I think we are in Sweden and the world. And this is very much sort of evolution of policy. And what I've been doing, which is sort of the formation of this presentation, is that I did some digging why we people really want an open internet. And what I've found is that this starts actually 538 before Christ. And does it go back that far? It actually does, because this is a clay cylinder that the Persian king, when invading Babylonia, after sort of running them over, and of course that's something we are pretty good at in human history, to try to kill each other, take over each other's land and cows and pigs and whatever we have, to grab food and whatnot. So what he did here was that on this cylinder in clay, that was the first time when sort of the king or the ruler of a country started to recognize the individual people that are sort of inhabitants in the country. It was a good thing to have people as part of your country. More people, more wealth for you as a king. We can then move forward to 1215, which is sort of what people think is the origin of, this is Magna Carta. And this is the first time when people said that, okay, wait a second, it's actually very important for people to be able to say whatever they want, to be recognized, to start to elect your own leaders, and to be able to sort of form groups and cultures. And yes, we are different, we do think different. So that's good so far. But then another thing happened. In 1439, we had Gutenberg that actually came up with the printing press. And this was kind of interesting because for as I just showed you, for a couple of hundred years, we have been thinking about how important it was that we all were individuals, we were going to think, would do whatever we want, and that's, of course, very good for a leader, until we as individuals could spread the word. So when the printing press arrived, that was really bad for the leader. Because suddenly we could write on the paper and say what we thought a good world would look like, and we could mass produce that material and distribute it. Downhill from there. So in 1766, and this is the reason why I made this presentation in December last year, or like a different version of it, this is a newer modernization. Sweden got the first law in the world that is the freedom of expression. This made it possible, tryckfrihetsförordningen, this made it possible for people to actually, this was a law that said people are allowed and they should have the right to be able to say whatever they want. 1766, so if we go back here, we see this was 1439. So it took a couple of hundred years before we got the law that said people have the ability to think whatever they want without ending up in prison. Of course, after 1766, it went downhill from there. The king invented all different kind of legislations that were like including lots of censorship and the ability to block things that are printed and all different kind of crap. In France, we had the Declaration of Freedom, very well known. Sweden, it went worse and worse, until something happened in 1830. We got the first newspaper. At this point in time, it was basically illegal to talk about anything that the government in Sweden did. And Aftonbladet, as a newspaper, invented two things. The first thing that they came up with was something called a journalist. It didn't exist before 1830. The second thing they did was that Lars Johan Hierta, that started Aftonbladet, he was thrown in prison because he printed things in Aftonbladet that was illegal. And the newspaper was torn down and closed. So he started Aftonbladet too and came up with all different kind of names of Aftonbladet, because the legal system made decision in court, you're not allowed, this newspaper is closed, you're not allowed to run it, and then he started a new newspaper the next day. He won, so we managed to actually get some more freedom in Sweden. And then in the world, in 1948, finally we got the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is still what we are basing a lot of the thinking in the world, and specifically Article 19, which says that people have the right to express themselves, participate in the society. And a lot of the work, not only legislation, but also corporate social responsibility and other things for companies, is based on this Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So this is where everything is coming from. What we should remember, though, is that the human rights and everything that we agree on in the United Nations, in reality, are only agreements between countries that states promise each other that they should do, either to protect their citizens, or they promise other countries that they will not do certain things towards their citizens. So human rights have nothing to do with companies, regardless of what people say. Human rights is something that are promises between countries. So this was a big thing in 1948. In 1968, we started to see internet. And of course, we in this room, it's not very difficult to sort of see the difference and understand the difference between the web and the internet, but we just have to read some articles and you see the difference. I'm happy to know both of these guys, and these T-shirts exist in only one of each, and you understand why. Tim Berners-Lee and Windsurf. In 1981, we still had these cars in Sweden. And people not being in Sweden, this is only 35 years ago. This is what we should remember. So my whole point here is that we have been working on this since like 500 years before Christ, and we end up in this. We have a monopoly. They provide the services. They provide the TDM-based communication. They sold the end equipment, and it was in the newspaper when they released a new phone with a new color, and lots of people, including myself, were lining up blocks and blocks of lines because you wanted to have a red phone instead of a blue phone that your neighbor had. And the most fascinating thing was when they released a new service, like hashmark 21, hashmark number, blah, 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 blah. Today, we get sort of a new service in App Store every fraction of a second. And by the way, we didn't have any regulator, and this company was owned by the government. How could we end up there? In '86, we started to get some competition. Here in Sweden, it was not illegal to start radio-based communication companies. So we had this Stenbeck that invented, gave the ability for anyone to have a radio and happen to have a touchpad so you could actually dial a number within that sort of radio system. But of course, you were not allowed to connect that, what is now cell phone system, to the telephony system that was run by the company with the orange cars. So they had a human sitting there, so you could request connecting your radio call into the telephony system by having an assistant saying, yes, I'm going to do this, connect you, plug in, blah, blah, blah. Then after a while, it was easier and easier for the human to sit there, and you had to have a human assistant. So at the end of the day, you had a lamp and a button, and whenever you had someone making a call to the phone system, the only thing the human did was to press the button. That was the way of getting around the legislation. And then, of course, the second cell phone company was created, etc. So we started to get some competition. This was only 30 years ago. When we started to get competition, there was also a need, of course, for people to keep their phone number, to change from one telco company to another one. So we had legislation on number portability. We started to have more than one company selling phones, not renting them. We had more than one cell phone provider. In '89, we had how many people here were working with the internet in these days? I recognize a few people. So I was working at the KTH in these days, together with some of you, and in September '89, we got the satellite link to John von Neumann Supercomputing Center. This link was not full. It was a 64 kilobit link. Of course, it was before libcurl. That's why, before Spotify. So, anyways, cool layer 2 network. And if we look in Europe, these were the only IP networks we had. In Germany, it was illegal to run IP packets. So each university had to have their own satellite link. This is not many years ago. So you had internet in the Nordic region, in Netherlands, in Italy, and Switzerland. In '96, we continued to sort of try to change things here in Sweden. And you recognize some of the people, and some of the people are here. We were a little bit younger then. I blame the aging of the paper to create such a pictures. Anyways, so what this was the group that decided that we actually thought it was a good thing if people could decide on domain names themselves. KTH didn't want to deal with domain names. We didn't want the government to take over. So this was the formation of the Stiftelsen för Internet Infrastruktur, the ones that run the .se top-level domain, and also Netnod. So LM Jogbeck. Anyways. We had no responsibility. We were making decisions. How could we? But politically, things went better and better. So I claim that in 1981, that was from 500 before Christ, it was pretty good. And in Sweden, for 240 years, it went down. And now it's actually getting better, I hope. In 2012, Sweden took the initiative in the Human Rights Council to decide upon this. Remember, you can read it yourself. The important thing is that in the United Nations, this is what countries promise each other. So all countries and all members of the United Nations, which unfortunately is not all countries, but of course that depends on how you define country. It's actually, if you don't have anything else to do, read the Wikipedia article on what is a country. There are about 30 or 40 territories, which the question is whether it's a country or not. Anyways, so what happened here is that countries say that members of the UN agree that it recognizes the global and open nature of the internet as a driving force in accelerating progress towards development in its various forms. So Sweden managed to push in the United Nations that countries recognize that open internet is important for growth. It's a little bit unfortunate that not every, for example, city in Sweden have read this and understand this, but anyways. Should we try a video with audio? Händer inget. So there's no audio. Anyways. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's move on. So, what else has happened regarding decisions? It was the statement of Carl Bildt, our then foreign minister, when he made his final argument before the vote in United Nations. So what then happened is that in I think 2001, the Swedish government decided to give a subsidy to build out of fiber, or rather build out of broadband. And that was sort of a mistake. I was helping the Swedish government in 2003. Yes, I failed. It was not so good. But on the other hand, I tried to clean it up. And together with some other people in the room, we managed to change the rules in 2008 to make sure that it was very explicit that the money that was given out is given to investments in passive infrastructure. Of course, a lot of people and a lot of citizens didn't understand and didn't notice this change in legislation and rules in Sweden. So ultimately, in 2014, the Swedish regulator wrote a summary of this is a clarification 6 years later, saying this is actually the rules. So it says, blah, 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 it must be an open network, can be used by multiple operators at the same time, and it says explicitly here that it must be open on the passive level. These have been the rules in Sweden since 2008. You must be able to rent fiber that has got subsidy. In 2016, the regulator is saying telling Telia, you're not allowed to sort of differentiate priority for various services. So things are sort of getting better, isn't it? And the National Audit Office in Sweden, they have been looking at the digital infrastructure in Sweden, and they have been looking specifically at the deployment of fiber. Their report on the fiber build-out will arrive, as far as I know, May 16, May 17 this spring. So in a month, we will see what the National Audit Office is saying regarding fiber build-out. And what they're looking at is, have people followed the rules? Have there been an audit? And have whatever the Swedish government decided been implemented correctly? And by the way, has the decision Swedish government did, has that helped Sweden as a society to reach the goals that the government has? Which basically means, did the government make the right decisions, or should money has been spent on something else? So we'll see in May. So here it says, planned publishing in April 2017. It will actually be mid-May. But then we have in 2017, we have this decision that says that B2 broadband must block the access to certain services, certain IP addresses, and certain URLs. It also says a couple of other things which are a little bit scary, that anyone can go to any communication provider and request them to block communication, if I exaggerate a little bit. And then the decision that I said between Telia and the regulator, Telia went to court and said, we would like to have this discussed a little bit further. Okay, anyways, doesn't matter, I can explain this. And what the court said was that Telia was right, and Telia do not have to follow the decision by the regulator. So this is going into court, and we'll see what happens. So it's still unclear whether the regulator is correct that Telia can do various prioritization or whether they cannot. So this is still an ongoing court case. So what actually happened now these last couple of years regarding oversight? You saw this nice picture with me and LM and others. Here in Sweden, we started the SWIPNet in March 1, 1991, the first commercial provider, and Telia came with TIPNet just a few months later. Netnod and NIC-SE started in 1997, but the interesting timeline was in the US, because they, just like in many other countries and just like us in Sweden, did also go through the same kind of thing to move a research network into be privatized. So National Science Foundation was funded by the research agencies within the Defense Department and National Science Foundation. National Science Foundation, basically like Vinnova in Sweden, is probably the closest you can get. There was a cooperative agreement written between National Science Foundation and Network Solutions in 1993, and this is just because someone had to do the operations. So they literally issued an RFP, and Network Solutions said, okay, we can run the DNS. At the same time, we had John Postel in the University of Southern California that was managing IP addresses and stuff. And the job that John Postel had was basically do IANA, manage top-level domains IP addresses, one person on his spare time. And this was part of the so-called Terranode contract with DARPA. So National Science Foundation didn't want to touch things, and DARPA didn't want either. They took a step back. So there was this internet thing, so what should we do? So this hot potato ended up with Department of Commerce and NTIA. So this was just like what happened in Sweden when KTH was releasing their interest in what we did in the internet. The same thing happened in the US. So suddenly ended up on Department of Commerce and NTIA. So, and at the same time, Network Solution was allowed to start a charge for domain names, $90 US per domain name in year. And they had the monopoly. So that was quite a lot of money. So it was some economical interest of actually running domain names. So John Postel created an ad hoc committee and published the new registries and delegation of international top-level domains. And in 1997, there was an MOU that a lot of individuals and organizations signed. Specifically, it was Tele2 and Telia in Sweden that was participating quite a lot on this through me and Amr Andersson. So there were a lot of signatories on how to move forward, but unfortunately, this was not implemented. So in January 28, basically nothing happened. In January 28, 1998, John Postel and the root serve operators, Lars-Johan Liemann, he's not here, right? No, he's not here yet. Anyways, they had a discussion on whether the root zone should be copied from VeriSign or whether it should be copied from John Postel. And the root server operator said, we trust John Postel. So they started copying the file from John Postel instead of from VeriSign. I was in Washington that day, and I was called to Department of Commerce the morning after. Bloody hell. So the good thing with that was that now suddenly the US government understood we better do something. So in February 1998, just 2 weeks later, the green paper was published that talked about multi-stakeholder processes. It was out on public consultation, and in 1998, in June, the white paper was published that talked about something called ICANN. In October, John Postel proposes the creation of ICANN to NTA, and then he died. November, ICANN is recognized, and on December 24, ICANN took over IANA from University of Southern California. So the summer of 1998 was kind of interesting. What we thought, we who worked on this, we thought that it would take about 2 years before US government contract with ICANN would actually terminate. And yeah, one of the things we can mention is that on the Department of Commerce side of all of this work, the person that wrote all this contract was Karen Rose, that is now a board member of Netnod. So in September 29, the MOU expired and replaced by a joint project agreement. This is 2009, 10 years later. Anyways. And then in 2012 and 2013, under the previous administration in the US, a lot of various bills were passed, and basically we wanted this contract to expire. And then we had the wicket in Dubai in December 2012. There was a Swedish delegation, recognized Maria, recognized me, but also Iran. This was when some states, even though we had this decision in the Human Rights Council, there was a push from some countries that the internet should be ruled by the ITU, by the United Nations, and by states. And they should promise each other, states, that illegal content, whatever that is, should be removed from the internet. We, Sweden, and others objected, and in the midst of all of this discussion, Iran, this is what the yellow flag with this black square, that means that you request voting. So Iran requested voting, and that stops the discussion in the UN. And suddenly, no more discussion, voting. And we felt from Swedish side, this was plan B. We were the ones that were supposed to request voting, but now we didn't have to. Cool. So there was some voting, and 89 countries signed. This is the first time since ITU was created that not everyone signed. The red countries did not sign. The black did sign. So the black countries here, they are the ones that wanted governments to promise rather to create legislation that would remove bad content from the internet, without defining what bad was. The red countries decided not to sign, and this is where we are. So what then happened was that there was a statement to accelerate this transition, and in March 10, the proposals were passed to the US government on actually removing ICANN from the US government, And we, of course, had an upcoming election in the US, and of course, what is now happening in the US was something that we envisioned. So this was me and Alyssa. Alyssa now being the chair of the IETF, really good person. I'm so happy that she is now the chair of the IETF. So normally she was the one having headache, but this I had. Anyways. So NTIA, US government said, okay, this proposal is good. We're going to terminate the contract. You kids, you get the car keys. Everything is fine. But then a domestic battle started in the US, and the Republicans, and Ted Cruz specifically, tried to stop this because the Republicans in the US wanted to still control the internet. The federal government was ultimately sued. Okay. And finally, on September 13, here. So the government was sued, it was brought up in court, and they decided, as you see, they were thinking between 4:26 and 4:30. The court were thinking for 4 minutes. And they had to make this decision before October 1st, because October 1st the contract would be automatically extended. So yes, I was awake until midnight. Kind of scary. But it was here decided that the Ted Cruz and the Republicans suing the Democratic Obama administration failed. It was turned down. So finally, in September 30, 2016, the contract expired, and there is no connection between the US government and the current running of internet anymore. Thank you. That was a lot of work. And note that Karen Rose, in 1998, thought it would take 2 years. She was wrong. Anyways, so where are we in Sweden? So these are the two core legislations we have. We have Tryckfrihetsförordningen, was created in 1766. As I said, it was downgraded until 1845. Today's legislation is from 1950. Tryckfrihetsförordning is about printed media, really printed on paper. Okay? We talk about books, newspapers. And this talks about the ability to also access information from public services. There are some exceptions in this legislation, for example, with child abuse. And it does not allow commitment of crime to get hand of the information. But otherwise, this is what gives us the ability to spread information in print. Then we have Yttrandefrihetsgrundlagen, which talks about the ability to express ourselves. It is very similar to Tryckfrihetsgrundlagen, but it is not about print. This is unfortunately only about expressing views in radio, TV, and video. And radio, TV, and video are very interesting, is defined in a very interesting way. That TV, for example, is something that has to be both TV and radio should be linear programming, it should be broadcast, and it is tied to the licensing that some TV and radio channels get to be able to broadcast in the terrestrial network. So this is only about broadcasting in the terrestrial network, not over the internet. Okay? And this covers everything from ads and protection on whatever. It also talks about web pages and access to databases, believe it or not. So web pages are very much as access to a database. There's also something that is called on-demand TV. And on-demand has also a couple of different kind of requirements. For example, there must be a catalog, there must be a listing, there must be all different kind of things. So some of the on-demand things are sort of that we're doing, like in YouTube and others, are not covered either under Yttrandefrihetsgrundlagen. So there are some special sort of exceptions for broadcast terrestrial radio and TV. If they are sending over the internet, the same rules does not apply. It is linked to, as I said, the broadcast and license for public service. Whistleblower issues, which is the third thing that is just added, that's a labor law issue. So whistleblower thing that we have added has nothing to do with either of these two. This is actually just a labor legislation issue. We are at the moment, there is now starting up a new media investigation that is looking at the definition of TV and radio. And this is something that I encourage everyone to keep their eyes on, because the definition of, as I said, definition of TV and radio today is tied to broadcast in the terrestrial network for public service and TV4 and others, not over the internet. So this is something that is really important to keep track of. So we do have legislation, including the Constitution, but it is terribly old, and it absolutely requires modernization. I was thinking of today to have a discussion about what is TV. That could have been fun. But on the other hand, because no one really knows. But the problem is that the investigation has now started, and no one really wanted to be here on stage. It's much more important that we need to run our formal process here in Sweden, and they will come out. So maybe next meeting or in a year, it could be interesting to have a look at and have a discussion, specifically in this room, about what is TV. Because if you ask the people actually doing radio and TV, they have a specific view, and I think people in this room, including the one coming from the Swedish Public Broadcasting Corporation and others, we might have a different view than them. So let's wait a year and talk more about that. Thank you.
So a huge expanse of time covered in that presentation. We've got some time left. Any questions for Paf while you have him here in the flesh? Anything not clear?
I'll be with you tonight and tomorrow as well. So.
Yep. Yeah. Any informal questions? Formal, informal for Paf? Okay. Well, thanks once again for a fantastic presentation. Cheers.